it's two plots that are barely
True.
connected with each other, going simultaneously: a snake and some diamonds.
There's no apparent connection between those two things.
Yeah, my name is George, and with me is Chris, and today we are looking at Hard Ticket to Hawaii from 1987. I don't know what to call this, the titty schlock? Is that fair?
It is. I believe they are referred to as the B00b series.
Oh.
Depending on who you ask, that either means bullets, bombs, and babes, or bullets, bombs, and boobs.
I was actually going to compare it to 365 Days too,
Okay.
but there's actually way more story than 365 Days 2.
Yes.
Surprisingly, even more character development.
Yes.
And in some really odd way, more erotic.
I agree with that. And I think it's because of what you're saying, because there is some character work
Yeah.
there. So if you haven't seen this movie, which would not be surprising, on the cover there are, well, indeed, bullets, bombs, and babes is kind of what the cover looks like. But then you are immediately thrown off because what you get is a horror film setup where a dangerous snake escapes from a crate while being transported. And quite a lot of time and effort is put into a slow burning killer snake on the loose suspense plot, which is not what you are expecting when you go into this movie. For everything that was ridiculous and terrible and laughable about this movie, I had a blast, and I felt like the people that were making the movie were making exactly what they wanted to, and they had a very clear vision of it.
Yeah. Everybody in this movie knew what they were in, and they had a fun time with it, I think.
Yeah.
And and I think that's the difference with Super Mario Bros. It felt like no one was having fun, and they weren't on set. Mm-hmm. And this one, I had a fun time laughing at it because it is so shitty.
Well, most of the female leads in most of his movies, so far as I understand, are former or current or then current Playboy playmates or penthouse pets or whatever awful term they have. Most of them are women that have that kind of career. Because obviously one of the things these movies do is show off a lot of nudity. Compared to all the other types of shoots that you would do being a Playboy playmate, I think this would have been a blast. Like, how often in that career do you get to fly planes and shoot guns and rip around on bikes and kill people?
Yeah.
Shoot guys in the face?
Yeah.
Rocket launchers? It's pretty cool, I thought.
Especially with their acting skills. The limits of their acting capabilities.
Yeah. Well, so okay, let's talk about the characters. That's a good starting point. There's our female duo who are undercover as a tourist plane, and so we introduced them taking some newlyweds on a plane tour where they're dropping them off on a beach where they're going to stay for the night. They're not very good, our two leads, at hiding their undercover agentness, because one of them just carries nunchucks that she casually plays with as they do the tour. We also have two male super spies who we introduced together, being somewhat racist and practicing their karate while talking about Confucius for some reason. Honestly, we could have done this episode by just listing all the things that happen in this movie.
Confucius say, man with deadly hands must be very careful while slapping on aftershave.
I wrote one note for the introduction of the two male leads, right? When the guy goes, Confucius say, and he actually does the full, awful Asian accent. And I say Asian because it's not any accent, it's just a sort of, blend same year vintage of anything Southeastern Asian. I just wrote, Jesus Christ. That's it. That's my note. but then I got to look at it from the time it is and so on and so forth. And I guess the whole Confucius say thing was a pretty common kind of gag, I think, right? Around that time.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think there was this fascination, obviously, with karate at that time. Karate and Confucius, not as linked as these two characters seem to be.
Not even from the same country.
Not the same country.
Or century, or even millennia.
But in any case, and this is something I was genuinely surprised by, because I hadn't seen this since I was a kid. I expected to be cringing a little bit harder throughout, at culturally outdated things, and I was very impressed with how little there was actually that had aged poorly.
You know, the showing nudity every 10 seconds, or even like the sort of Asian mockery sound that they were doing, it wasn't as awful as it was, for example, in the 2000s Charlie's Angels, because I feel like the whole movie, the vibe of it fits, even with its awful stuff that are outdated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally do. And I also want to add that I think, and this is wrapping back around to characters, I think that another reason that it kind of worked for me, to whatever extent such a thing can work, is that it just seemed like such a sincere expression of what these guys might be like. Like, all these characters are larger than life and totally ridiculous, but I just felt while watching them screw around and do this silly Asian thing, I have known people like that in real life that would say something stupid similar and would just sincerely have no malice whatsoever behind it. And just not really have ever thought about the implications of saying such a thing. I don't know how much the movie knows this, but the characters are just dumb. Like, they're goofballs, all of them. And it kind of doesn't, it doesn't bug you. I agree. The way that if you think about, like, well, people had like $50 million and they went through a bunch of studio notes and they still decided to do racist jokes in the mid 2000s. That feels very different than, this is a bunch of people presumably railing cocaine every night, making this ridiculous movie with terrible props and terrible costumes and terrible everything. Just like they're in their own little worlds. Because they've gotten so close to a Hollywood movie in certain ways, you really notice the deficiencies, or you really notice the things that they're not able to do as slickly or as fully as Hollywood.
Which reminds me, if you're interested in listening to the full-length discussion of this episode, you can find it on our Patreon. The link is on screen and in the description down below. If you go over there, you will get the entire recording in an audio format like a podcast. Check it out, support us, help us keep doing this. We really appreciate it. Anyways.
Well, and I think maybe part of it is also the acting capabilities, right? The acting limitations, I should say. Like, there's this one scene where I noticed this the most with this guy, one of our lead guys. He's on the phone. He says a line, and he reaches over with his left hand to switch the phone from one ear to another.
Okay.
But while he's doing that, he had to stop talking to perform that action to then continue the second half of the sentence.
Right.
And it's just like, why couldn't you just do the both at the same time? And that little pause, even though it's only half a second long, it's half a second of silence.
Right. Almost nothing feels more low budget than random silences. You're right.
Yeah.
Because that's the one thing Hollywood will never let happen. They'll just, there'll be ludicrous on the soundtrack the second there's any risk of silence. While we're at the point of the mini helicopter, I also just want to say, well, and this is a great example, again, of the indie Hollywood thing. Like, you got this kind of hilarious, so bad it's good moment where the plot to deliver the diamonds is that they'll boat almost up to the shore, and then a mini helicopter will fly it all the way to shore. And then the problem that happens is that our leads stumble across it. They get in a nunchuck throwing star fight with the henchman, and then the henchman can't send the money back that's supposed to go on the helicopter, which kind of highlights what a terrible idea this is for moving contraband. But again, the dedication to entertainment would not allow them to say something like, well, how about they like boat in and drop off the thing. It has to be, let's get a mini helicopter. Let's do something flashy and awesome that you wouldn't see in other movies.
Yeah.
And I just really feel like that commitment to being cinematic is sometimes not as present in the equivalent movies today. Because you're just seeing unexpected things all the time, that really goes a long way in this movie.
Yeah, I was so shocked by the way that the scene decided to play out that I didn't even had time to consider how logistically nonsensical it is.
Right.
That a toy helicopter can fly that far inland, out of view, into trees and still function, right? I didn't even think about that until afterwards, and as I was writing the notes. But at the moment, I was just so surprised by it. And I think the other part that contributed to me not thinking about the logistic of it is, or the realism of it is that the movie doesn't take itself seriously.
True.
And yeah, if a bigger budget movie did that, I think they would go serious. And then I would go, well then where's the logic in this, right? Because if the
right.
movie is presenting itself as like gritty and dark and whatever, then I'm forced to question its reality.
What is that? It's coming right at us. Look out! Get out of the way!
And then we get this, I thought, incredible scene where there's major exposition as they discover the diamonds, discover that there's a smuggling plot, discover that they need to kind of stop this criminal plot. And while that happens, both women are nude, sitting in a jacuzzi, and just fully on display. And I just thought that was such a funny sort of logical endpoint of the Hollywood approach. Okay, if like sex and violence is what keeps the audience going, the most boring scene is the scene where they just like talk out the plot and have to figure out what they're gonna do. So let's just put full nudity the entire time so people don't get bored listening to the plot. It just seemed like such a perfect distillation of, well, like the Baywatch model or the sex and violence cells model. I just thought that was hilarious. In fact, even down to the close-up as they reveal that it's diamonds.
It still had a boob in it.
Breasts in the background.
If brains were bird shit, you'd have a clean cage. I'll get someone else to handle them.
The director inserting himself into the film and his other movies into the movie as posters in the background and even being talked about, it somehow felt less gross than other directors who put themselves in the movie, but put themselves in like either prominent roles or the roles where they get to, well, let's be real, like with Tinto Brass, get to fondle the actresses.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's the perfect comparison, because in this movie, he plays a TV producer, and the jokes are at the expense of this producer that he has attempted to assault women, and all these jokes are at his expense. He plays this slimy, awful guy that the movie knows is slimy and awful. He definitely came down on the right side of an issue that I think less people were talking about in that way. Maybe, I don't know. I couldn't find it in myself to find this movie that irresponsible. And I'm curious what you thought about it.
I couldn't either. So here's the thing. I think the main reason is because they weren't trying to pretend to be something else. The movie isn't trying to pretend to be something better than it is. It knows exactly what it is, and it's kind of proud of it. So I think what makes it gross is when a film tries to get on a soapbox or pretend that it is serious or that it is something that it isn't.
You know what? You're so right. What you called to mind immediately for me is the movie Bombshell that came out a couple years ago. Did you see that movie?
No, I haven't.
It was the one about the allegations against an eventual firing of Roger Ailes. So that film is a perfect example. Obviously, its intent was very high-minded, and it wanted to be a sort of expose of these issues around sexual harassment and assault. There is a sequence in that film where we see an on-screen abuse of power with Margot Robbie. In this film, that's supposedly this like feminist message film, right? We get this sequence where we see Roger Ailes doing his disgusting thing, but the scene itself was also just very like leering and disgusting, and they kind of like eroticized the scene itself,
right?
Where it like, I'm not saying that it was like, you know, shot with like steamy saxophone or anything, but like there was kind of a sexual gaze to the way that the sequence was presented. And it was like very disgusting.
Oh my God! Oh! Snake! Go away! Go away!
Our female leads knock over the cage and the snake gets loose. And in the next scene, which presumably would be like minutes later, the snake has magically teleported outside, but is across the road from Seth, the gangster boss, who proceeds to freak out way more than he should at seeing a snake at night in the dark somehow, all the way on the other side of the road, and just starts blindly shooting at it.
And it does not make him more intimidating as a bad guy
No,
to see him just shit his pants with fear as he shows up to attack the heroes. The culmination of the snake plot, which I'll let you describe.
yeah. So Seth refuses to die essentially for quite a while.
He hangs on.
He really hangs on. I mean, he gets a harpoon, he gets knifed, he gets all those things, and it reminded me of that Turkish film, like the guy that repeatedly gets shot and refuses to go down.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that, but more blood and with a snake.
The snake even bites him so viciously it has like gore stuck in its fangs after it bites him. So the snake enters the scene by bursting out of the toilet in a full-blown creature feature shot where like the snake bursts out, there's this massive lighting cue, there's like smoke all around the snake. I swear the smoke the snake like generates lightning effects as it explodes out of this toilet. One of the characters has nunchucks through the entire movie. There are a lot of nunchucks in the movie. The one thing that doesn't happen is that anyone ever uses nunchucks as nunchucks.
Yeah.
So early in the film, she's swinging the nunchucks, but then when they get into an action scene, she just straight up, like, point blank throws the nunchucks into a dude's head. Here at the end, they brutally beat a man to death with nunchucks, but they're not swinging the nunchucks. They just hold both of them and beat him like it's a club. Then they turn to the final bad guy. One of them says, "I'd say it's all over for you." And the bad guy responds, "In a pig's ass." As with all the other lines, I have no idea where that came from, and I would accept no other line than that.
Yeah. The bad guy also has a samurai sword and decides to throw it.
He throws his sword. I guess that's just what you do with weapons in this world. And then, in perfect 80s fashion, he goes crashing out a window and falls 30 stories to his death. Perfect 80s dummy shot.
And you think the movie would end there, like RoboCop. Nope, there's still another ending after that on the boat.
We have to find out what happens to the diamonds, which is that they steal them.
Yeah.
3 of them are law enforcement officers, 1 of them isn't. And she's like, "I'll just take the diamonds because I'm not a cop, and then I'll share them with you all." And that's what they do. They steal the diamonds. This movie has probably the worst montage of all time. I don't even know if it's a montage, but a sex scene that's intercut with a little bit of other stuff, and it's like, it's finally the romantic sex scene, I guess, out of all of them. And it's the most like a softcore porn scene in that it's the one where they're just like awkwardly in the same pose for a really long time. They just do new shots of them in the exact same position to make it seem like there's sex going on somehow. After that, they're kind of lying in bed together, and she's like, "Wow, it's so wonderful," and that leads to one of the other great exchanges in this movie where she asks something along the lines of, "How was it for you?" And he responds, "One man's dream is another man's lunch." Do I know what that means? No.
I dare any viewers, next time you have sex, say that afterwards and tell us what happened.
Let's go into our how we could make this Hawaiian ticket even harder. This is what I wrote for the segment. What would I change? Honestly, nothing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That wraps it up for this episode with Hard Ticket to Hawaii from 1987. Next week, we are doing another schlock, but from 2004, and it is the Mary-Kate Olsen and Ashley Olsen movie New York Minute.
We're doing a hard left turn from this week for sure.
We actually debated for a while on which of the Olsen twins movies to pick from, because they're all pretty much bad, but we wanted to pick one where they are basically adults instead of just us laughing at two young girls for an entire episode. So yeah, we picked one where they're grown up, but the movie has not.
And I think this one that we've chosen was kind of like the biggest budget, like kind of the. I don't think it's considered the best one, but it was sort of the peak of them, I think.
Okay, cool. That's it for this week. We are done. Remember to press like and subscribe, but give us some support. Really appreciate that, and we'll see you next week.
I want to close this episode with the first lines of Hard Ticket to Hawaii, which are, "You should get in, Rowdy. The water is great." Are you kidding? I've got better things to do with my body temperature.